Hello and welcome to this week's bonus episode of Planet Critical, the podcast for a world in crisis. This week I interviewed Trevor Hilder. Trevor is an IT specialist and a systems specialist who's devoted the past 20 odd years of his life to better understanding the viable systems model that was created by Professor Stafford Beer, how to apply it to organizations, and how to teach it to other people. Trevor came on the show to explain the viable systems model, and this was probably quite a departure from other episodes because we had a lot of fun just back and forth about the particularities of the model, about the morality of it, about capitalism even. Is it viable? Is the free market viable? So it was really, really good fun to debate all of that with him. What I want to do in this bonus episode, I think, is to run through what the viable systems model is quickly, and then discuss the difficulties of trying to create new frameworks within an existing paradigm. So the viable systems model has five functions that allow a system to adequately function within its environment. The first one is operations that deliver a service. So what that means is human, non-human elements that essentially make a system go round. So he uses the explanation of, or the example of people working at Starbucks. This first system would be the people serving coffee. It could be the cells in your body that travel around and do different things. The second is coordination. So that's a management structure, perhaps, that organizes the operational elements to work together and not perform the same function at the same time, for example. The third function is cohesion. And this is where we started to have a little bit of debate. So cohesion would be the management structure above that, for example, in an organization. That encourages workers to take accountability for their actions and does so by resource bargaining with them. So it's the power structure in place that makes sure everybody does their job and signs contracts, is contractually liable, just make sure all the pieces are moving together correctly. We did debate about whether or not resource bargaining and power, essentially leveraging power, is the best way to make a system cohesive. And what I did find interesting is towards the end of the episode, Trevor did explain that this can also come from an organization or be used by an organization that is collective. It doesn't have to be a top-down approach, although it does sound a lot like a top-down approach. And this is where my thoughts kind of wander to: how possible is it to diagnose a system or a problem and then create a new framework to solve that problem when existing within the very paradigm that created the problem? I think I said to him at one point in the episode, this sounds like quite a conservative model. Certainly sounds like quite a capitalist model. And he said, no, it's not. So I wondered how much of it is me projecting the paradigm that I know we exist in, that most organizations do accommodate, and not understanding what it is that he's proposing exactly, versus how much of it is trying to solve a problem by using the very framework that exists and propagates the problem. Maybe more on that later. So the fourth function is intelligence. So can a system adapt as the world evolves? Can it adapt to fit its clients' needs? Can it adapt its own management structure? Can it be dynamic? This is where, for me, it gets particularly interesting, because arguably with the climate crisis, the problem that we have is huge multinational corporations and industries that are refusing to be dynamic and refusing to adapt. So rather than actually recognizing the problem that we have of depleting resources, the absolute necessity to decrease energy consumption, the inequitable distribution and theft of resources around the world, economic inequality, rather than acknowledging and addressing those issues, and being dynamic and understanding that their own business model and perhaps purpose or way of being in the world absolutely has to change, not only to ensure their own survival, but all of our survival. They rather would invest money on greenwashing to continue business as usual, which is a phrase that is deployed a lot around the climate crisis, and I think is incredibly useful. They would rather continue business as usual than make that very difficult short-term investment into figuring out how exactly they need to change as the world is evolving. because with the data that we have and have had since the 1970s, it is very clear that we cannot continue as we are, industrially, economically. Resilient systems would be able to adapt with that because we would have invested in their dynamic nature. And then perhaps that means that the systems that organize corporations today are not natural and not at all dynamic. That might be unhelpful and oversimplistic language. So I think actually using Trevor's framework of intelligent is particularly helpful. Is your organization intelligent? Would you consider yourself an intelligent board member or CEO? Are you stupid? Is your organization being stupid? And how can we help you be less stupid to not overheat the planet? And I'm sort of doing this with a smile on my face, but let's not remember right now, 9th of May, I just saw a headline. There's a land temperature of 62 degrees Celsius in India. People are dying en masse, and it is only going to get worse. So whether or not it is greed or stupidity, ignorance, a malignant desire for power, whether it's an amalgamation of all of these things that drives leaders to make bad decisions and refuse to adapt to the evidence that is screaming at us from around the planet, we have to find a way to be able to reach them, speak to them, and we do need to find a way to adequately diagnose the problem. And I enjoy the sense that couching it in terms of stupidity and ignorance would perhaps light a different kind of fire under people's asses to get something done. There's something quite idolatry in being named a supervillain, an evil person, isn't there? Whereas if the entire public just thinks you're stupid, then to rehabilitate one's own image, perhaps these people that have access to decision-making and power would be more likely to make different decisions. I don't know. If anybody knows if there's any research that's been done on this, please drop it in the comments below. I would love to know more. Finally, the fifth function that allows a system to function adequately in its environment is identity, purpose. So who are we and what do we do? Obviously, this harks back to Simon Sinek's Why, the incredible TED Talk and system that he's created to better understand how and which organizations are successful and how. Trevor delivers this really interesting theorem or axiom that Stafford Beer came up with, which is the purpose of a system is what it does. So rather than swallowing PR, we can look to what a system is actually doing and what a corporation, organization, government is celebrating to establish what it is actually doing. And yet again, on this podcast, another episode that comes right back down to value systems. We have to create a different value system, and then we have to build from that. We have to create actions from purpose. And yet again, the problem becomes timing. We have 8 years to create a new value system, 8 years to teach it, 8 years to find out ways how to action it. And we have run out of time to do that. We cannot afford generational change. I had an interesting thought last week about Sally Gurner and what she said about the fact that change always comes from the middlemen, so the people just below the powerful. And I was thinking about the personalization, the anthropomorphism almost of corporations. I mean, they all have Twitter accounts and they all have tonalities and the way that they express themselves online, or the fact that workers speak about their employer as a we. You know, these systems are dynamic in a sense. They are alive almost. And I was thinking perhaps they are the middlemen rather than a class of people or managers. Maybe we need to go into corporations and attempt to change their culture. And maybe that is something that we could achieve quicker than generational change. So it would be a way to insert value systems into an economy and into some of the biggest industries which are driving the vast majority of planetary destruction. Again, in the comments, please, if you know of any organization that is attempting to do this, is thinking about it or has done it in the past, and beyond just, coming in and being management consultants and figuring out a company's purpose in order to get more work out of their workers. But genuinely, either organizations that help companies do this or companies that have recalibrated and completely reoriented their value system with an understanding that the world is changing and they're going to become irrelevant eventually, or be part of the very reason that we're seeing land temperatures of 62 degrees over on the other side of the world. All right, I think that's enough for me this week. To the Planet Critical community and everyone else watching, thank you so much for joining me. If you're new here, remember to subscribe to this channel. If you're enjoying Planet Critical, you can support the podcast at Patreon, patreon.com/planetcritical, or on the Planet Critical website, planetcritical.com. Both of the links are in the description box below. A huge thank you to everyone who is already supporting this work. I'm so grateful to have a community. I'm so grateful to see you all enjoying it. And frankly, it just wouldn't be possible without your support. Thanks, everyone, and I'll see you next week.